Thank you so much, Anna. That was Anna Camerali, and without her, this would not be occurring. So, great thanks to Anna for all her organising.
Closer to the mic, please.
I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my respect to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose lands we are meeting. And it's a brilliant space in which to pay those respects and to welcome any Indigenous or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today, and also to pay our respects to any elders, past, present, or emerging, in a context like this where we're celebrating cultures from all around the world. And so it's my great joy to introduce our speaker, and so I will get underway right now by taking you back 100 years. On Tuesday, the 22nd of November, 1927, the Shakespeare Society of New South Wales met at the Mitchell Library in Sydney to, and I quote, inspect early editions of Shakespeare's works and to hear lecturettes on them. We will in fact be doing exactly the same thing on the 7th of December this year at the State Library of New South Wales as part of the Shakespeare Beyond All Limits conference co-hosted by the Library and by the Australian and New Zealand Shakespeare Association, of which our speaker this evening is president. So make sure you see us again in December. At that meeting a century ago, in 1927, the president of the Shakespeare Society of New South Wales, Mr. W.F. Jackson, observed, and I quote, that it was often claimed by people who knew little about the subject that there was no scope for original research on Shakespeare in Australia. I'm relieved to say, and I assume you are too, that his view, as reported in the Sydney Morning Herald a few days later, was that this particular claim was quite wrong. Rather, the Herald reports, the Mitchell Library and Public Library had Shakespearean collections which would reward the study of the most profound scholar as well as of the layman. Now, I am about to introduce a most profound scholar, an Australian Shakespearean researching Shakespeare in Australia, no less. But before that, I want to underscore and set in your minds for consideration two resonant truths arising from that meeting of 1927. Truths that I hope might also resonate with the paper you're about to hear. The first is that in 1927, which was 3 centuries after the first collected works of Shakespeare was published in 1623, known as the First Folio, and whose quarter centenary we celebrate this year, the idea of the importance in its own right of, and I quote, original research on Shakespeare was both a current idea and an increasingly global idea. Not only that, but such research was also seen as inherently connected to textual study, and thus the Shakespearean collections in Sydney were seen as both catalyst and object of serious inquiry. This connection of Shakespeare research to text isn't surprising, in that the Shakespeare Society was meeting in a library, and so while public play readings and staged performances were also key interests of the Society, the November 1927 meeting had a particular focus on the First Folio itself. Indeed, at the meeting, the then Mitchell librarian, Mr. Hugh Wright, noted that in addition to the library's internationally efficient system of indexing and reference, it could also lay claim to holding a copy of the First Folio and the Second Folio of 1632, and having aspirations to obtain in the future, despite high costs, various Shakespeare texts in quarto. So that's the first point for reflection. Shakespeare's scholarship seems inherently tied, one way or another, to core Shakespeare texts. The second point I'd like to draw out of the meeting in 1927 is that the point was made that rewarding study of Shakespeare, drawing on his texts, is for the layman as well as for the most profound scholar. And so here lies the sense that Shakespeare offers something to all inquirers, and the layman is not diminished by comparison with the scholar, but sits alongside the scholar. This, of course, points us to the age-old notion that Shakespeare's genius, evidenced over centuries, lies in his ability to speak meaningfully via his art to people occupying diverse positions and roles in society. Now these days, a century on from that meeting at the Mitchell, we are much more attuned to the inherent biases of empire, colonisation, race and gender that permeated the dissemination of Shakespeare's art around the world through the 19th and 20th centuries. This no doubt impacts, but not necessarily fatally, our sense of Shakespeare as a voice speaking to all, and certainly as a voice speaking for all. But my lesson from this is slightly different. It is that Shakespeare, via his texts, or via performance, pedagogy, or biography, connects with, no, is inextricably entwined with, life. Now, whether or not we agree that the scholar and the layman are both rewarded for their study of Shakespeare, we cannot deny that Shakespeare and his texts come down to us from an infinitely complex lived reality. And that lived reality is inevitably, necessarily, perhaps mysteriously, definitely intriguingly, preserved in the quartos and the folios themselves. The texts of Shakespeare, preserved in Shakespearean collections, themselves seem to preserve something more than either their materiality as books, paper and animal skin, ink and glue from centuries ago, or their captivating stories and dramatic compositions. They preserve by echoing a life lived long ago, not just the life of the playwright or his company, but the broader discourses or zeitgeist or happenings of the world from which the text as book first emerged to begin its long journey through time to us. And so that's the second thought for reflection. While Shakespeare's scholarship seems inherently connected to Shakespeare's texts, those texts themselves seem inherently connected at some deep, ineradicable, yet attenuated fashion to past life. If Shakespeare's scholars and Shakespearean texts connect with one another, as it were, horizontally through space by the visiting of old libraries and archives, those same Shakespeare scholars connect with past life, as it were, vertically through time by studying the texts they visit. Archive work is time travel. Professor Laurie Johnson is not wrong, as the kids say today, to propose that the First Folio is a time capsule. It has without question captured and conveyed to us, 4 centuries after publication, rich textures and sense of its time. Some of these more opaque to our sensibility and understanding than others. When the State Library of New South Wales received its First Folio, the sole known copy in Australia, it arrived as a gift from the Birmingham industrialists, George and Richard Tangy, in late 1884, and that gift was wrapped in an ornately carved wooden casket, made for the purpose of containing the folio. So the casket is a time capsule, containing within it a very special book from 1623, which, as Professor Johnson will shortly detail, is itself a time capsule, containing within it well, I won't say, any more than affirming the topic that though this be an inanimate old book, it is animated by study and scholarship. If there is a lived reality to be witnessed still in the First Folio, our speaker is a reliable witness to record and share it. Because we are in expert hands with Professor Johnson as he opens the First Folio time capsule for us, because he possesses a rare combination of skills as a literary scholar and historian. He holds a professorship in English and Cultural Studies at the University of Southern Queensland, is president of the Australian and New Zealand Shakespeare Association, on the editorial boards of highly regarded journals like Shakespeare and Early Theatre, and has published a host of scholarly articles and book chapters, in addition to 2 edited book collections on Shakespeare, and 4 sole authored monographs, the most recent being the much anticipated Leicester's Men, Their Plays, an early Elizabethan playing company and its legacy, appearing later this year with Cambridge University Press. That is just a gesture to his literary credentials, but they immediately point us to his parallel capacity as historian. Laurie Johnson is advisor to Museum of London Archaeology and University College of London Archaeology South East in respect to early English playhouse excavations and analysis, and is Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of London and Fellow of the Royal Historical Society. In sum, as an historian of Shakespeare and early theatre, regardless of being Australian, his expertise is highly credited. So you are in the company of a serious scholar who has demonstrated for years what original research on Shakespeare looks like in Australia, and thereby won the esteem of colleagues at home and the respect and admiration of scholars and professional bodies overseas. To this list of research accomplishments, which is select in both senses, I want briefly to add one more point. Laurie's collegiality and genuine care for both the field and the scholars, teachers and students within it are second to none, and exemplary of how the scholarly and the pastoral can walk together so that the benefits of the profession are not an individual's treasure, but a warmly shared experience. So thank you for being our Shakespeare Memorial Lecturer for 2023, Laurie. It's time to open the time capsule.
Thank you, Liam.